The train screeched to a halt with a long metallic sigh, sending up clouds of steam that curled into the cold morning air. Maria clutched the handle of her worn brown suitcase tighter, her knuckles pale against the leather. She had spent weeks on this journey, days on the ship, nights staring out train windows, at endless stretches of land she had never known existed. Every bump of the wheels, every whistle of the engine, had carried her farther from the life she knew and closer to a man she had never met. Her heart raced as the conductor opened the doors. Passengers hurried out, men in dusty hats, women gathering children, families reuniting with laughter and embraces. Maria lingered, her breath shallow. She smoothed down her simple dress, checked the ribbon in her hair, and stepped onto the platform with trembling legs. The station was small, little more than a wooden building with a faded sign, but to her it felt enormous, overwhelming, as though every eye might be staring at the stranger who didn't belong. She searched the faces in the crowd. Men with calloused hands hauled crates. A mother hushed a crying baby. A young couple kissed as if the world around them had vanished. But where was he? Where was John, the man whose letters had been brief, whose words had been plain, yet whose name had been written on the paper that offered her a new chance at life? Finally, she saw him. Standing a little apart from the bustle, leaning against a post, was a tall man in a worn jacket and hat pulled low. His arms were crossed, his expression unreadable. He did not step forward. He did not smile. For a moment, Maria's heart lifted in relief. There he is, only for it to sink again when his eyes met hers and gave nothing back. No warmth, no welcome, just a weary acknowledgement, as though she were a package he had expected but did not particularly desire. Gathering her courage, Maria walked toward him, her suitcase heavy in her hand. Every step seemed louder than it should have been, echoing in her chest. She rehearsed a greeting in her head. "Hello, John, I am Maria. I am glad to meet you." But when she finally stood before him, words failed her. She managed only a soft, nervous smile. "You came," John said, his voice low, his tone neither kind nor cruel, simply factual. He nodded once, then reached for the suitcase. His grip was firm, but his eyes never lingered on her. Maria's heart stung. She had dreamed secretly of a warmer welcome, perhaps a handshake, perhaps even the brush of kindness in his voice. But all she received was silence. As they walked toward a waiting wagon, Maria kept her gaze on the ground, her shoes tapping the wooden planks of the platform. Around her, families laughed, reunited in joy. And in that moment, though she stood beside the man who was supposed to be her husband, Maria had never felt more alone. Maybe he never really wanted me, she thought, her chest tightening as the wagon wheels creaked to life. The farmhouse stood at the edge of the fields, weathered by wind and time. Its white paint was chipped. The shutters hung crooked, and the roof sagged in places. To Maria, it looked less like a home and more like a lonely sentinel standing against the endless horizon. When John lifted her suitcase from the wagon and carried it inside, she followed silently, her steps careful, her heart heavy. Inside, the air smelled faintly of wood smoke and dust. The furniture was plain, sturdy, but there was no softness, no warmth. No curtains adorned the windows. No flowers rested in vases. It felt like a house where people lived, but not like a home where people loved. John set the suitcase by the stairs. "Rooms up there," he muttered, pointing without looking at her. Then he turned away, busying himself with hanging his coat. His words had been few since they left the station. And though Maria longed for conversation, even the simplest exchange, she dared not push. That evening, she tried to help in the kitchen. She found potatoes in a sack and a few carrots, and with nervous determination, she peeled and chopped, preparing a simple stew. The rhythm of the knife, the bubbling of the pot, the rising aroma, it gave her something to cling to. Perhaps if she cooked well, he would see her worth. When she placed the bowl before him at the table, John ate in silence, his expression unreadable. He neither praised nor criticized, only spooned the food slowly until his bowl was empty. Maria's heart sank. She had hoped for a word, just one kind word, to make her feel less like a stranger. But the silence between them pressed heavier than any insult could have. At night, Maria lay in the narrow bed of the upstairs room. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. but it was the silence inside that hurt her most. She turned her face into the pillow, muffling the quiet sobs that escaped her. Did he bring me here only out of duty? Out of need, not desire? The thought burned, leaving her hollow. Days passed in much the same way. Maria cleaned the rooms, swept the floors, washed dishes, mended clothes. She moved through the house like a ghost, working without complaint, always hoping for a flicker of gratitude. John spoke rarely, answering her questions with single words, his gaze always elsewhere. It was the little footsteps that broke the monotony. Maria began to notice them, soft, hesitant steps padding across the floorboards. Sometimes, when she glanced up from her work, she would see a pair of curious eyes peeking at her from behind the doorframe. A small girl, perhaps 6 years old, with tangled hair and solemn eyes, John's daughter, Emily. But just as quickly as Maria noticed her, the child would disappear again, darting back into the shadows. Emily never spoke, never approached. She simply watched, silent and uncertain, as though Maria were a stranger who might vanish at any moment. That distance cut Maria deeper than John's silence. The evening sky stretched wide, painted in strokes of gold and fading pink. The farm lay quiet after a long day's labor, the fields whispering under the breeze. Maria sat alone on the wooden porch, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She had finished her chores hours ago, but there was nothing left to do but sit and listen to the silence. The boards beneath her creaked softly as she shifted, her eyes gazing out at the horizon. Loneliness pressed against her chest like a weight she could no longer carry. Each day had been the same. John's silence, the emptiness of the house, and the fleeting shadows of a little girl who seemed afraid to come near. Maria had begun to wonder if she would ever find her place here, or if she had crossed oceans only to remain an outsider forever. The door creaked behind her. Maria turned, half expecting John, but instead, a small figure appeared in the frame. Emily, the child, hesitated, one hand gripping the edge of the door, her tangled hair glowing softly in the fading light. Her eyes met Maria's for a fleeting second, then darted away. Maria's heart skipped. She wanted to say something, anything, but the words caught in her throat. She feared that speaking too soon might shatter the fragile moment. Emily took a step forward, then another, her bare feet padding softly against the wooden boards. She stopped beside Maria, so close that Maria could hear the quick rhythm of her little breaths. For a long moment neither spoke. The air between them hummed with unspoken fears and unanswered questions. Finally, Emily reached out a small hand, tugging gently at the fabric of Maria's dress. Her voice was barely a whisper, trembling, fragile. "Will you be my mommy?" The world seemed to pause. Maria felt the words pierce straight through her, melting every wall of doubt, every shadow of loneliness that had weighed her down. Tears stung her eyes, spilling before she could stop them. She pressed a hand to her mouth, trying to steady her breath, but her voice broke as she knelt down to the child's level. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered, her arms opening wide. Emily hesitated only for a heartbeat before falling into Maria's embrace. The little girl clung tightly, burying her face against Maria's chest, as though she had been holding back this longing for far too long. Maria held her close, her tears dampening the child's hair, her heart overflowing with something she had nearly lost hope of finding: love, acceptance, belonging. In that moment, it no longer mattered that John had been silent or that the house had felt empty. In this child's arms, Maria was no longer unwanted. She was needed. She was chosen. When Maria finally lifted her gaze, she noticed John standing quietly in the doorway, watching them. His expression was unreadable, but softer somehow, touched with something she had not seen before. He didn't speak, yet his eyes lingered on the sight of his daughter in Maria's embrace.